Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into one of the most detailed and, frankly, mind-blowing prophecies in the entire Bible. The idea here is that all of history is running on a very precise, divine clock. So let's just start with a pretty wild question. Could a prophecy from over 2,500 years ago actually predict a specific day in history? I mean, down to the very day. Well, the case we're breaking down today argues that the answer is a resounding yes. And this incredible claim all comes from the prophet Daniel. He was given this precise timeline that was specifically for his people, Israel, and their capital city, Jerusalem. You can think of it as a master key, a chronological roadmap for understanding a huge chunk of biblical events. Okay, so first things first. To even begin to understand this timeline, we've got to get the language right. The whole thing is built on a special unit of time that's probably not what you're expecting. You see, the prophecy talks about 70 weeks. But these aren't your typical 7-day weeks. The original Hebrew word Shabuah literally just means a 7. And in this context, it means a period of 7 times years. This would have made perfect sense to ancient Jews who already thought in 7-year cycles for things like the Sabbath year. So let's do the math. 77, or 70 weeks of years, adds up to a grand total of 490 years. And this 490-year period is God's specific timetable for dealing with Israel and Jerusalem, all broken down into a few distinct phases. All right, every timeline needs a starting point, right? A go button. And this one is triggered by a very specific historical event. Now, according to the sources, this isn't just any old decree. It's the one that gave the green light to rebuild the city of Jerusalem itself. And according to this interpretation, that prophetic clock started ticking on a very precise day, March 5th, 444 BC. That's the day the Persian king Artaxerxes gave the official command to Nehemiah, giving him the authority and the resources to go back and rebuild Jerusalem's walls. And this is where it gets really interesting. The first major chunk of the prophecy, that's 69 of the 70 weeks, or 483 years, is said to have been fulfilled with just stunning, pinpoint accuracy. So these first 483 years are actually broken into two parts. You've got the first 49 years, which cover the difficult rebuilding of Jerusalem. You can read all about that struggle in the book of Nehemiah. And that was followed by another 434 years, a long stretch of time leading right up to a truly pivotal moment in history. Now, to make the numbers line up, there's one more piece to the puzzle. We have to use what's called a prophetic year, which has 360 days. Now, before you think that's just a convenient cheat, sources point out that this 360-day calendar was actually common in the ancient world, and it shows up consistently in other Bible prophecies, especially in the book of Revelation. So if you take those 69 weeks of years, that's 483 years, and multiply it by 360 days, you get a very specific number, exactly 173,880 days. Remember that number. It is the absolute key to this whole thing. Okay, so what happens if you start on March 5th, 444 BC, and you count forward exactly 173,880 days? Well, the calculations land on one single date in history, March 30th, AD 33. And what happened on that day? It's identified as the triumphal entry, the very day Jesus rode into Jerusalem and publicly presented himself as the Messiah. And what's wild is that this adds a whole other layer of meaning. When Jesus was weeping over the city of Jerusalem that very day, he said the city was headed for judgment because it did not recognize the time of your visitation. In other words, they missed the exact prophesied day of their Messiah's arrival. So if 69 of the 70 weeks are fulfilled, culminating on that exact day, what about the final week, that last 7-year period? Well, according to this interpretation, this is where the timeline takes an unexpected turn. The clock stops. The idea is that after that 69th week ended, God's prophetic clock for Israel was paused. This created a gap, kind of like a parenthesis in history, between the 69th week and the final 70th. And guess what? We're living in that gap right now. What's really crucial here is that the prophecy also predicted two huge events that would happen after the 69th week ended, but before the 70th could begin. First, that the Messiah would be cut off, a clear reference to the crucifixion. And second, that the city and the temple would be destroyed again, which is exactly what the Romans did in AD 70. So all of that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, that last, unfulfilled 7-year period. This is what's known as the 70th week of Daniel, and it's often identified as the future time of tribulation. So, when does the clock start ticking again? The prophecy says it kicks off when a future world leader, often called the Antichrist, makes a 7-year treaty or covenant with the nation of Israel. That treaty starts the final 7-year countdown. But right in the middle, at the 3.5-year mark, he's going to break that treaty, betray Israel, and set up something the Bible calls the abomination of desolation. And that all leads to the grand finale, the second coming.
So why? Why this incredibly intricate 490-year plan? What's the point of all this? Well, the prophecy itself actually spells out its own grand purpose.
Right there in the text, it says this whole 490-year plan is designed to accomplish 6 specific things for Israel. Things like finishing transgression, putting an end to sin, and bringing in everlasting righteousness. To put it simply, the entire point is to finally and completely deal with the problem of sin and to establish the Messiah's perfect kingdom on earth. So here it is, the whole timeline laid out. You see the starting point with that decree to rebuild. You see the clock stopping after 69 weeks with the Messiah's arrival. Then there's this long gap that we're in now, followed by the future 70th week, and finally, the end goal. It really is a stunning picture of history and the future, all laid out on a divine schedule. When you get right down to it, the big takeaway from this prophecy is that God is in complete control of history. The argument is that the incredible fulfillment of the first 483 years serves as a powerful proof, not just of the Bible's accuracy, but of the absolute certainty of the future events it describes. And that leaves us with one last question to think about, one that really highlights the incredible implications of all this. If the first 483 years really were fulfilled to the exact day, what does that tell us about the final 7? It suggests that the end will unfold just as literally and just as precisely as the beginning.